All right, good morning. Thank you so much to everyone for coming. Today's webinar is put on by the Efficient and Healthy Schools campaign, and this session is Track 1, Energy Efficiency plus Health. I'll let everyone introduce themselves later on, but today presenting we have Renji Chan from Lawrence Berkeley National Labs and Riley Loveland-Falvey from New Buildings Institute. My name's Izzy. I am a project analyst at New Buildings Institute, and before we get started, I'm just going to let you know of a couple things. So first, you're muted right now and we can't hear you, but you can use the question pane or the chat function to interact with us. Later on, when we get to the interaction part of the session, I will make sure you are able to unmute yourself and come on video so that we can have a peer-to-peer discussion. And right now, we can take questions in the chat, like I mentioned, or in the question pane. If you have any technical difficulties, please let us know in the chat and we can help work those out for you. And I wanted to mention that the presentation part of this is being recorded, so we can share that with you later on and you can refer back to it. We won't share out anything that we talk about in the discussion group, but we did want you to have access to this recording later on. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Riley.
Thank you, Izzy. I'm going to come on camera here. Oh, and I just turned it back off. There we go. Thank you all for joining. I know many of you on this call, and for those that I don't know, my name is Riley Loveland-Falvey, and I am here. Actually, I'm in Iowa at the moment. I am typically in Portland, Oregon. So I represent kind of half of the US at the moment. I'm actually going to bring everyone else from the Efficient and Healthy Schools team online really quickly to have themselves introduce themselves so that you can see all of us. We're here to help you throughout this entire process. So Renji, why don't you go next?
Sure, Renji Chen, Berkeley Lab. And I know that Allie Johnson is on. We are in California and she's not sharing her camera right now. Allie, you want to say hi?
Hey everyone, I'm Allie Johnson and I work with Renji Chan on the campaign from the Berkeley Lab side.
Amy, you want to go next?
Sure. Hi, everybody. Amy Cortez. I'm Program Director at New Buildings Institute. I'm located in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And thanks everyone for being here. Glad to be here. Emma,
Izzy?
do you want to go ahead? Or Izzy, sorry, go ahead.
Great to see you all. This is me on camera talking. I am located in Portland, Oregon, and I am a project analyst with New Buildings Institute. And Emma, I'll let you go next.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Emma. I'm also with the New Buildings Institute. I'm a project analyst, and you may recognize me from some of your onboarding calls. So happy to be here and happy to be support along the way.
Thanks, team. Okay, I'm going to have us all turn our cameras off just because of the bandwidth and the sharing. I'm going to turn my camera off too, but then we can all come back on later so you can, kind of interact with real people and not just a screen. Next slide, Izzy. Thank you. So as Izzy mentioned, this is the first in this three-part webinar series. And for all of you attending, you do need to watch all three of them. If you're not able to physically attend, or I guess virtually attend at the time of, you're welcome to watch the recording. Each session will have a set of survey questions after that's kind of like your credit for watching the session. We'll actually talk through ours later just so you kind of get a feel for them, and then you'll fill them out on your own. They're quick, I promise. It's just a few questions. Next slide. And then you met us already. Next slide, please. So today we already kind of went over the introductions. I will do just some sort of like level setting, do an overview of the recognition process, just because I know there's two different ways to get recognition, and then there's also two different planning track series that you're welcome to attend. Some of you are registered for both, which is great, and some of you may want to be. And then we'll just talk about kind of the meat of this discussion, the making the case for efficiency and health, and then planning for and sort of setting up that plan for your efficient and healthy school. And then we're going to have some time at the end to chat with each other, because I know some of you I've talked to during your onboarding calls or just in some one-to-one time. And that's one thing you mentioned, is that you'd really like to be able to talk to each other. So we're happy to provide. Next slide. So if you're able to, we'd love to know who's here. Please introduce yourselves in the chat with your name, title, and your school district. and any other information, if you have a favorite color, whatever you want to share. Great. And then here's what you all can expect from this series. You're going to learn about some of the different tools that are available for achieving these energy efficient and healthy schools. The tools will be sort of more present in the next two sessions. This one, we're really talking about building that case so that you can start to implement these tools, finding the peer-to-peer connections. You're going to have access to regional and national technical experts. We also, if there's something that comes up and you really want someone that's more region specific, you know, if you're, let's say, in the Midwest like I am right now, and you want to talk to someone from the Midwest, but they're not present on the call, we can help connect you with somebody. And then during the office hours, and then also after too, we want to be able to provide you that sort of real-time guidance to develop your climate appropriate goals and these plans. So we keep talking about the plan, and I will explain what this plan is in a few slides. And then of course, gain national recognition. Next slide, please. All right, let's talk about the recognition process. Next slide. So some of you may have seen this in the kickoff webinar. I did want to just sort of like, you know, bring this back up so that you all can see, you know, what this looks like. There's two different categories that schools can gain recognition in. One is this energy efficiency and health. That's where you are today. And then emissions reduction and resilience. There is a second webinar, or a first webinar of that series, a second webinar in January, in a couple weeks for that one. Like I mentioned, some of you are registered for both, and you're welcome to do so. If you're not now, we'll provide some links. Next slide, please. Here's the dates too, and note, if you click the next slide thing real quick, Izzy. Thank you, perfect. Note there is an updated date for the emissions reduction, the second one. We realized that the original date was during the National Green Schools Conference, so we were all going to be doing something else, so we bumped it up a week. We'll get out some updated calendar invites for that too if you are registered for that. Next slide. And here's the registration links. We can put them in the chat for you, but just in case you did want to see them quickly, here they're right here. Thank you. And then let's talk about, so the planning. Here's the timeline for this planning track for your recognition. So you're attending the webinar series right now in this January to March winter timeline. During the spring, you'll get together with your either other people in your school district. You can get together with us to help prepare your materials for the final submission. That's this plan. And then your final submission will be due on May 1st of 2023. And what it'll do is summarize some of the key learnings you learn in these things, and then describe your next steps for implementing, you know, an efficient and healthy school. And so some of that may be like how you're going to use these tools, how you're going to use the data, the approaches, and I'll sort of make that a little clearer later. But during the office hours too, we can talk about clarifying that even more if you need to. And then in June, there'll be an in-person celebration, and we all get to, you know, shout our success. Next slide. Great. So here's the deal with the plan. We want these plans to be obviously tailored to your school district needs, and they may evolve over the course of this series. Like during this session, you may see something that you're like, okay, I'm going to make a plan about that. But then over the next one, you're like, actually, we should do that. So don't feel like you need to decide exactly what it looks like right now, and it will very likely evolve. And the goal here is an actionable plan that is not extra busy work. So, you know, I've heard from some school districts that they don't want a 12-page document. They want like a 1-page document that is like just quick timelines. And I'll show you an example of what that might look like in a little bit. That's great. If that's what you need in your district, we're all for it. Or if you want, you know, a longer, kind of more holistic document, that's great too. And they can be focused on a particular topic like energy efficiency, indoor air quality, indoor environmental quality. It can be focused on a particular action, like making a plan to assess all of your building stock and then understand which ones you want to do first. And then it could also be part of an existing plan, or maybe you have a bigger plan that you have, you know, in mind, and this is just one piece of it. Or this could be the whole thing. It really, really depends on what you identify for your school district. And it can be in any format. It can be a PowerPoint, it can be a Word document, a 1-pager, an infographic, and we'll show you some examples today, but I have more examples if you kind of want some more examples to, you know, noodle through over the next couple of sessions. Next slide. Okay, and then, so that's the planning track. That's what we're in the middle of. Some of you I've talked to about also participating in the implementation track, which means that you have an actual project that's been implemented, it's going, it's done. And so that could be like, you know, you've put in CO2 sensors throughout the entire building, or it could be you have done, you know, an energy upgrade, something like that, an HVAC upgrade, whatever that looks like. So next slide. And if you're going to do that, it has a slightly different timeline where you're right now in the winter, you'll fill out an application. There's a link to the application at the bottom there. We can provide that later too. And to request assistance from us if you need, this team can help. We also have other technical assistance providers that can help. I also highly recommend that if you're applying for the implementation track and you did it with, if you did the work with someone like an energy services company or a solar provider, local like college, something like that, they can help you too, and you should encourage them to do so. And then you'll submit your final submission. This is the difference. This one is in March 1st, whereas the planning track is May 1st. But again, the announcement and the fun in-person times will be in June of 2023. All right, next slide. And for some reason, I can't quite see if anybody's putting anything in the chat. I don't know if that's just because my access is different. So if you do have questions, I can get to those a little later. For some reason, I also can't see the question pane. Izzy, do you know if there's?
I will try to fix that. It looks like people have been introducing in the question pane, so I will get you access.
Great, thank you, perfect. Well, thank you all for introducing in the question pane. I appreciate it. We are, you know, just kind of working on this technology. If for some reason by the way, if for some reason, you know, this GoToWebinar system, see it, thank you so much. Thanks for being here, everybody. But if for some reason this doesn't quite work, we are super happy to switch over to something like Zoom or whatever you need to. So please let us know if you would prefer something else. All right, I don't necessarily see any immediate questions. If someone else does, please let me know. All right, so let's talk about planning for efficiency and health. And again, we'll have some time to chat with each other later where we'll unmute. So if you do have questions and I'm still struggling with this question pane, which I apologize, feel free to just hold on to them then and we can talk then. Okay, so I've kind of tossed out this idea of what a plan can look like. It can look like part of a plan, it can look like little pieces, it can be focused on a topic, like whatever you think you need. Some of you I've talked to sort of have an idea of what this might look like already, but you know, if a plan can be long-term. I show this graphic up here because this is sort of a long-term roadmap, a long-term look. I mentioned an infographic potentially as a plan approach. You know, this could likely be, it could be a portfolio level roadmap that is looking over the long term to a certain date. You see that 2045 end date and then some milestones in the middle. And these little roads, some of you have probably seen this. This is our roadmap graphic. And these little roads represent different building life cycle events. So, you know, if a major modernization is happening, you may have certain goals, or you may, if a new construction is happening, you may have certain goals. So this is sort of one way to think about it. This is sort of a long-term approach. Next slide, please. For some reason that is misbehaving for me. There we go. And so it could also be a plan focused on a common action. You know, I talked about building assessment as one, because these actions here that are represented are actions that we found that districts commonly do, trying to achieve efficient and healthy schools. So it could be any one of these, or it could be something slightly different. So, you know, for example, let's give a good example. So your plan could be an assessment of your building stock and setting some goals based on that. We're actually going to talk about that a lot in the next session. I know some of you have done that, so this could be an add-on to that. It could be taking those goals and incorporating them into planning document or into policy documents. It could be a plan to engage your occupants in those goals in your work to like make meaningful change with the occupants, but then also make sure that your goals are achieved. We're going to focus a little bit today in this session more on the kind of like stakeholder engagement and visioning and the messaging that makes the case to support this work. So that's sort of what your plan the messaging that will help implement your plan. And then throughout this series too, we'll touch on these other approaches. Next slide, please. One more. So let's sort of talk about this case making. So I'm probably preaching to the choir a little bit here, but some of the benefits of these efficient and healthy schools is, of course, lower operating costs. And I fully recognize that that may not always be the case, because sometimes operating costs mean different staff costs or whatever that may mean. But ultimately, these buildings are simpler to operate. They can be simpler, and they use less utilities. They have increased student and staff health and productivity. They're healthier. They're just more, they're just more wonderful to be in. They have educational benefits, especially if you're tying the occupants to the actual building's function. And then they can provide a resilient hub for communities. And, our second webinar category, or the second recognition category, is that emissions and resilience. So if that's the word resilient really speaks to you and you're not attending those, I highly recommend doing so. Next slide. And so when you have all of these messages, when you're kind of working through what both your plan might look like and then how to implement it, you really need to start identifying who you need to get on board and sort of who's taking charge. I'm guessing most of you are the ones taking charge right now. So you're identifying the champion, maybe you, or maybe it's someone else. Maybe you're here sort of representing like, oh, Cheryl in facilities might actually be the best champion here. And then who are the actual decision makers? And who else would be a great candidate for your team that can help implement your plan and help implement your goals that you have set forth? It could be people in facilities, it could be teachers, there's like a whole list of people it could be. So just kind of start thinking about who that great candidate might be. And then what Renji will talk about in a minute is the messaging that you need to communicate. So what messaging do you need to communicate to the stakeholders that are the decision makers? And then, of course, in order to understand that, in order to be able to communicate that messaging, understanding what their goals and the stakeholders' drivers are. Some people it's money, some people it's, student outcomes. All of them, it's probably student outcomes. But, everyone has a slightly different interest based on either their job title or just their own personal feelings. So one thing that you can do, next slide. Other direction. There we go. Excellent. One thing you can do is bring everyone together for a visioning session. This idea was brought to us by Jeremy Shannon at New York City Schools, that they do these visioning sessions where they bring everyone together. It sort of doesn't necessarily matter if everyone agrees on the ultimate goal, but we just want to come together and use storytelling to talk about successes, talk about if your district already had successful stories, telling them. We're listening to others that come in. You don't necessarily know that maybe other people in your school district have had successes from before, or bring in outside entities to talk about successes too. You can discuss your goals. Everyone should have a turn to sort of talk about what their ultimate goals are. That's that stakeholder understanding, and then desired actions. So someone may say like, I really want a solar panel covered roof, or someone may say, I just want to make sure that the bottom line balances out. That's my goal. Perfect. And so in doing that, you can identify your synergies and your similar goals. You can kind of start to piece them out. Be like, okay, I see that everyone, one of the through lines here, like I said, is probably student outcomes. Another through line here is saving money. So you can start to parse those things out and really start to align. And I love this concept of in the visioning session, like kind of getting rid of the square box that we're all in, and thinking about what does this perfect, efficient, and healthy school or portfolio look like. So next slide. We do have some data to support, trying to communicate the stakeholder messaging. Renji is going to talk about a lot of data, which is going to be phenomenal, because that's what you're really going to use to sort of, frame that visioning session. But there's also this stakeholder messaging guide that NBI has put together. This one is carbon neutral schools focused, but it has data about energy, health, and emissions. So it applies to this group quite well. Next slide, please. And Renji, it's all you.
Thank you, Riley. So I'm coming from it from a slightly different angle. It's been a great partnership from Berkeley Lab. My background as a researcher. my main focus has been on indoor air quality, ventilation, energy efficiency. So it's really great to work with New Building Institute, coming with this different angle, the way that they've been working with school, and we're partnering together to better support all of you. With that, today what I'm going to do is tell you 3 stories. All of them can be motivation of why we want to have efficient and healthy school. And I'm going to start with a California example. This is a big energy efficiency program that our state had. And next slide. It started in 2013 and it ended right before the pandemic hit. And over the course of 5 years, the state distributed about $1.5 billion grants to more than 7,000 school sites. So it's pretty big scale. And about 80% of our LEAs apply. So it's really good participation. And from that, we're trying to learn what kind of measures, efficiency measure they have, these schools have implemented. Then I gave you some idea of, if you're making plans to make your school better, what are some of the measures that have shown success and they apply to you. So you can see from this table, a lot of it is lighting. Lighting is our pretty low-hanging fruits. And then after that, a lot of HVAC upgrades and retrofits that were happened. And following that, there's a good suite of different technology that maybe you haven't been thinking about, but seeing this list, like there's some of the things that you can do to make your school more energy efficiency and more energy efficient. Next. So just quickly, I know these are California numbers, may not apply to you, but just want to show you the distribution of site cost saving that this study found. You can see the mean and medians number are about $10,000, $16,000 per year of cost saving. So there's a great reason why we want to do these retrofits. You're seeing cost saving. Next. And if we look at the energy efficiency measures that are ordered by the annual cost savings, now note these are estimates calculated based on the difference in post-implementation use and baseline use. But if you take that number and order the measures, what comes up from the top is, if you look at the second, third line, these are also HVAC type measures that are coming on top of the list. The cooling towers, pump motors, drives are very cost effective, and it has a high saving to investment ratio, and also has a very high annual cost saving numbers. Next. Now you may say, well, that's great for California, it doesn't quite apply to me. Do stay on to our webinar series. Towards the third webinar, we're going to have another national lab join us and share with you all some new tools that are out there that you can pick out some energy efficiency measures, run the model. It will give you some cost savings specific for your climate zone. And so definitely join us for March 14th for that webinar to learn more about all these new tools, the Quick Building Assessment Tool, Asset Score, and then there's also the energy conservation measure cost estimates. So that's going to be really useful to give, if you're proposing a project, these are some of the rough numbers that you can see. And even today, our lab, Berkeley Lab, just released this models retrofit package performance for prototype schools. So basically, a lookup tables. The prototype school that we use our model to predict energy saving may not directly apply, but give you a sense of these are the types of energy saving that you can expect. And it is for all climate zones. So if you're not in California, you can look up from that table where you are and get some sense of what kind of energy saving you can expect. Next. So I'm going to switch topic. That's all about energy saving to talk a little bit about COVID response. It's been a driving force that brought all of us together, paying more attention to school ventilation, filtration, and all the funding comes with it, right? ESSER and more. So I want to talk a minute about COVID. Next. So in late 2020, the Center for Green Schools surveyed 47 school districts. So pretty still earlier in the pandemic. And at that time, they were interested whether school implemented the 6th recommendation from the Harvard School of Public Health. The 6th recommendation were to asking school to increase outside air, flushing, open windows, use fans to bring in more outside air, MERV 13 upgrade, and then using portable air cleaners. They got 47 school districts to fill that survey, and some of you may be in the audience, so thank you. Next. So a year after that survey came out, the campaign worked with Center for Green School and tried to repeat the survey again, but this time we asked questions slightly differently. And since we joined forces, I was really happy to see the number going up. We got 88 school districts to fill out the survey. And this time we were not only asked about what were implemented, but also what information influenced your decision. Did you have enough funding to support what you want to do? How do you think about cost and effective? Do you think they work? What you did actually led to whether it was risk reduction or your student, teacher healthier. And then whether you have future plans to do more with risk mitigation. Next. So the survey asked lots of questions. If you're one of the audience, fill out our survey, thanks again. But here's one question that I want to bring up to talk about today. So we ask, what are the overall cost or saving from the changes that you've done to ventilation, filtration, other building controls compared to roughly same period during the previous year? Most of you said that there's a costing quite a bit more or moderately more, like 3/4 of you. And I think this cost would include some more staff time to deal with all these changes, some material cost. We all know MERV 13 filters cost a lot more than whatever was used before. But there's also energy cost that's wrapped in this costing more. So seeing this statistic is one way to communicate to your stakeholder that there's a need that we need to invest more in energy efficient HVAC technology, continue to improve your operation maintenance practices so that we can have both healthy and efficient schools. Next. But there's also a lot of benefits of doing this. One of the survey participants joined us for a focus group discussion, and the person said this: if we have healthier kids because we have better ventilation, and the person said, well, I don't really know what the numbers are, and I don't really know we can say for sure what those numbers are, but we can certainly say that they are linked. Ventilation keeps kids in the school, which keeps our budget happy. So there's definitely a connection that your awareness how these things are connected. Next. And if your plan is to continue to improve indoor air quality, this is one area your school wants to focus on. I think the Clean Air in Buildings Challenge, led by EPA, is really a great place to start. It lays out the 4 steps that you need to do. Next. And we've focused on step number 1 to create an action plan. How that's very on topic of what we're talking about today. To lay out an action plan is just 3 actions. One is to assess indoor air quality. I think gathering information about your school HVAC system is a great place to start. And we also have a new resource that we created. It's a relatively simple Excel form that you can follow and gather some basic information about your school HVAC system. Another great thing to do will be do ventilation assessment. That we're going to talk about next month on February 14. We have someone from the National Energy Management Institute come join us, Chris Rouge, to talk about ventilation assessment. Great things to do. Other approaches are doing occupancy survey, monitoring CO2, and we can, if you're interested in those, come talk to us. We'll then have a conversation about those different approaches. So the second thing that the EPA said we should think about is plans for upgrades and improvements. We've already mentioned that there's a lot of tools and resources that we have for you to think about what kind of HVAC retrofit you're interested in, what makes sense for your climate, and so on. And finally, pay attention to HVAC inspection and maintenance. Always a great thing to do. Next. And before I leave the COVID topic, I just want to share you this recent Lancet report. Lancet is a public health journal, and where a bunch of researchers joined together and formed the COVID group. And what these researchers are saying that they've looked at the literature, they understand that different way of thinking about ventilation, that we're thinking about just CO2 concentrations or air exchange rate or the per person outside air and so on. But after they've looked at all those in the literature, this is the conclusion they came to, is that there is no debate that the current targets are too low. So expected to see some changes in what they call a health-based ventilations. I know that ASHRAE is working on it too. In the next 6 months, we're going to see more coming from what research community, the professional groups are thinking about this topic of how we should be ventilating our schools. Next. Which brought me to my final topic of today, is to think about how our school facility impacts students' health and performance. So it's leaving the COVID behind, but more generally, how it impacts students' health and performance. Now, if you remember early in the pandemic, we're all reading COVID papers. You can see news reporters thinking about, oh, this study said that, that study do say that, and that's very common in the scientific world, where there's this information coming up, different study may not agree, which is why it's really useful. Once in a while, we do a review paper and look at what all the evidence out there. This group of researchers from the University of Toronto asked this question: can green schools influence academic performance? It's a great study that came out right in the middle of COVID, I think. So that's why you may not have read this one. What they found is that after reading all those different studies, they come to the conclusion that building features that come into lead do have a strong association with academic performance. And in particular, indoor air quality and acoustics are really the feature that they found the most strongest association. Next. And another reason why there's all this research coming out, and sometimes you're like, oh, why are these things conflicting? Because it's complicated of how facilities impact the education outcomes. So here's another review looking at it from a different angle from the Colorado State. A group of researchers kind of outlined 3 main processes or link. So they said that indoor air quality and exposure can directly impact student health. So we can think about students suffering from asthma symptoms. If there's dampness and mold in your school, that really can impact their health directly. And if they're absent because their symptoms are so bad, then clearly impact their academic performance. A second way is that kind of the general indoor environmental quality can impact learning. So we're not just talking about indoor air quality, but also lighting, acoustic, thermal comfort, very important. Students are distracted, too hot, too cold, the teachers are distracted, they can't really focus on what they're there to do. And the third way is the overall quality of your facility can influence something they term as school climate. Kind of think about how excited or how proud your student, teacher, staff are feeling about going to a facility. The better your facility is, the more proud, more excited they're going to be, and that helps with learning. Kind of makes sense. So there's kind of the 3 main ways, and you can see how we frame a study looking at each different topic area. It's very complex, and how that comes together is really important to study the interactions. Next. So another recent work from this group of researchers and focus on a school district in Colorado. It illustrates the connections, how these different pieces fit together. So they survey 134 staff, many of them are teachers. They found that the increase in school climate score, so how excited people are feeling good about working, learning there, is associated with fewer health symptoms. And for survey participants who said that where the school climate score was scored lower than the mean, a school facility that have better indoor air quality is associated with fewer symptoms. So it's another way to show that indoor air quality do help. Next. So switching gear, I want to talk about Colorado, traveling to the East Coast, looking at New York schools in New York State. So this is a bigger scale survey that a study that they did looking at how different parameters impact school health. So over 4,000 schools in New York State. they look at different data sets on asthma among children and then school facility conditions, mold problems and whatnot. And they found that these conditions, mold, dampness and mold, classroom too hot to dry, ventilation problems are associated with higher asthma rates among children. Another thing that they found is that noise, again, acoustic noise and also lighting condition does show that it impacts teachers' work. And next. And finally, my last example today is a study that is now from Atlanta, so moving further south. This is Baltimore schools, public school, 158 Baltimore public schools. They look at the students' performance data between the 3rd and 8th grade, looking at that reading and math scores, and also chronic absenteeism. And they found that the school facilities, conditions, some of the other parameters about where the schools are in conjunction with outdoor air pollution, all those could have impact on the learning outcomes of these children. And next. So the same group of researcher, this is an interesting study because it's an intervention study. So among those 158 schools, I think they recruited 7 of those schools to participate in this intervention study. They measure some of the condition of the school before retrofit, carry out some retrofit, and given these are pretty substantial retrofits, HVAC and other measures. And what's so exciting about this is they show that after retrofit, they saw a reduction in a lot of the parameters they look at. CO2 levels come down, suggesting better ventilation. The indoor PM 2.5 came down. We know that there's health outcomes associated with PM 2.5, so lower exposure in school is a great thing to do. So it's really exciting to see that there's a small number of schools, but after they did the project, there's really real impact that you can show. So next. So my last slides, I kind of walk you through 3 reasons why we want to aim for efficient and healthy school. One is you're going to see energy saving. You're going to see benefits to your indoor air quality if you pay attention, implement measures that can address that. And finally, we expect to see student health and learning improvements. And I'm going to show you this picture. This is a kindergarten that my son goes to. It's a brand new school, beautiful facility. We know that there are great examples out there. What we're doing here is trying to elevate some of those examples and help each other, learn from each other, from your peers, from some of our national, regional experts, that we can do more of these great examples. With that, I'm going to hand it back to Riley.
I didn't know that was your son's school. That is so neat.
Yep.
What a great case study. Thanks, Renji. Okay, Izzy, next slide, please. Wonderful. And I'll quickly address a couple of questions in the chat. Yes, there will be access to these slides. And at one point, we will unmute y'all to talk too. If someone wouldn't mind trying to test the chat. So there is both a question pane and a chat. Give it a try. If I don't see anything pop up, then we'll fix that. I just want to make sure. And then I will repivot back to what this plan could look like. This is kind of what I mentioned in the beginning, but I did sort of want to ground truth it and talk about it again, given all of that information that Renji just, gave to us. A lot of that is so interesting. The Prop 39 stuff is so cool. Y'all, I really hope that every state can implement something at least relatively similar, but focus less on gas infrastructure. All right, so if you hit the next slide button. So your plan, like I mentioned, could look like anything. It could look like something like this. This is Boulder Valley School District, and note that this one looks really pretty, and this was developed by hiring outside consultants, and this is not necessarily the typical process. This one is like a very robust, probably, it costs some money to create, so keep that in mind here. And then next button. I guess I could just say next, that makes it easier. But maybe your plan is the framework of a similar plan. So it could be something like that Boulder Valley, but just kind of setting up the framework so that you could, hire consultants in the future to develop a more sort of robust, pretty plan. But maybe it could also be something, similar. I mentioned that this can look like anything, a Word document, PowerPoint, whatever, to make sure that it fits your school district. You know, we talked to one school district and they said they are more about, you know, implementing and less about, you know, creating a bunch of documents that won't be referenced. And I love that. So maybe it's just a one pager like this. Your plan is like something that was developed for Lake Tahoe or for Portland Public Schools, where the plan includes specifications for the process and requirements for every type of construction project. So this might be a little bit small, but this is a document that, or a little one pager that shows that for modernizations, there these types of techniques are mandatory or case by case. So these kinds of things, specifications might be in your plan. And then I will say that both districts, Lake Tahoe and Portland Public Schools, did pass a formal resolution to formally adopt goals that guide this work. So those are some nice, that's a nice pairing. I'll kind of talk about that in a second too, that your plan may include a whole host of documents. And bear in mind, you don't need to start from scratch either, because templates exist for documents like what was developed for Portland Public Schools or Lake Tahoe, or resolutions or owner's project requirements or interview questions for people that you're trying to have do work, or RFPs, etc. Next slide, and I will show you an example. Oh, right. Also, key pieces of the plan might include your audience, your team, assessment data, timelines, and goals. Next slide, one more. I put animations in here because I love them, and then I forget about one always. So some templates in the toolbox. This one on the left here is an example of the carbon neutral schools resolution template. This language can be tweaked too to say, you know, be a little bit more about energy efficiency or resilience or whatever you might want. So this is just kind of a starting spot for you. Next. Or this is a report template. We talked to one school district not that long ago that talked about how they had, you know, they already had goals, they had a resolution, they had some projects that were done, but they were really having a hard time getting their stakeholders to like stay involved. So their plan might include developing a report template and a plan for continually updating it and continually engaging their stakeholders. So that's kind of like the back end of the stakeholder engagement. So there's a template for that type of report. And then one more. That one thing was supposed to disappear, but that's okay to make this look a little easier to look at. But for example, another thing that is in the templates toolbox that we have, and we'll provide a link to this, is just putting this into some sort of like trajectory. So you're putting your goals into, you know, formally documenting it in a spreadsheet, and that way you can sort of look at it visually. And that's another good stakeholder implementation tool, or it's just something for you to, that could be your plan right here. Just your trajectory is your plan. So just some examples of how we have templates that can help you develop this plan. Next slide. So what could be in my plan? I have touched on, I think, quite a few of these, but I just sort of want to keep talking about it in this session, since we're going to be talking a lot about tools to be used to develop your plan in the next ones, so that as I go through things, or as I go through these slides, more and more ideas sort of start to populate in your head about what this plan could look like. So your plan might include, it just might be key messaging and stakeholder documentation. It's a plan to, you know, get your stakeholders involved and what kind of data you need to get them interested. Or maybe it's like the back end stakeholder, like I mentioned that one district had. It could be a list of your goals and then the relevant, you know, plans that are associated with those. So it could be a list of, you know, all of your goals for energy efficiency, and then how you decide or how you want to implement those. It could be a list of documents you want to develop. It could be, you know, you want to develop a resolution or some technical specifications based on some goals that you set. That could be a plan. It could be a plan either based on benchmarking and assessment data, or it could be a plan to benchmark and assess your building stock for energy or indoor environmental quality. It could be project or portfolio level goals. It could kind of look like that infographic I showed at the beginning, and you will totally see again in a slide or two. Or it could be a series of planning timelines and a project list. It could be like, we have 12 schools, and by 2040, we want all of them to be to some sort of you know, energy efficiency goal or IEQ, and these are the 12, and this is exactly how we want to prioritize them. So it really can look like whatever you want it to be. And again, like I mentioned earlier, these can be just, you know, we're focusing on energy and health here, but it can be part of a holistic a holistic document. So if you also want to include waste, water, recycling, anything like that, that's totally fine too. Next slide. So now that I have thrown many things and many ideas at you, just kind of consider what your plan might cover. The topics I've mentioned might be indoor air quality and health, energy efficiency. By the way, if you are doing both series, emissions and resilience, you don't need 2 plans. You can make one plan that includes all of these things. So your plan may include, like I said, all 7 of these things, whatever is a priority for your district. Other sustainability, it might be a climate action plan. I've heard the words climate emergency plan. I like that one. Or it can just include one of these things. And, you know, we're gonna, during the discussion section or during the office hours, we're gonna talk about this in particular, just see if there's any questions or if there's other ideas that can be surfaced. Next slide. So I bring this back because again, your plan can be long-term like this, it can be shorter term, it can be focused on a specific action, it can be focused on a specific topic. So whatever you think is a priority for your district and whatever you think is a priority for your community as well. One more slide. That's actually not true. There's quite a few more slides, but one more slide in this section, I should say. So next session we'll cover the assessment and goal setting, which is, I think some of you probably already have these goals. I did see in the chat at one point, the gentleman from Atlanta, he said he already has some of these goals, which is great. I'm all for that, and that can be incorporated into your plan. And for those that need some support, we're here to help you kind of noodle through the tools to assess your building stock and set those goals. Next slide. One more. All right, so one thing that we like to encourage everyone to do is something called a stock take. So it's taking stock of what you have. And that is a great place to get started so that you can do those building assessments, so that you can benchmark. So you want to kind of take stock of what goals you might have in place, what is in process. You as if you're a sustainability person, if you're a facilities person, if you're a superintendent, whoever you are, you may be missing pieces of, this kind of like stock take web that you may think you have, but talking to other people will help you really make sure that you have that web of understanding so that you know what's in process, what's being planned, if key stakeholders are on board, if they even are aware that you're thinking about sustainability, if you have facility master plans, etc. And if you go to the next slide, I have a list. This is a long list. It looks very overwhelming because it's a lot of words on a slide. I totally understand. So you may have some of these, you may have none of these. None of them are required, but this is just a list to get you all started. And one thing that we'll do we're going to discuss this a little bit during the office hours, and then we'll have that follow-up survey I mentioned. We have this list so that you will be able to go and say, okay, we have that one. We have goals, but we want a formal district resolution. So we'll kind of start collecting that data for you, and then we'll give it to you when you're forming these plans. So during these surveys, they're not just busy work. They're actually collecting data so that you sort of remember what we discussed during these sessions, and you can continue to use it throughout the plan. So it's like a note-taking system. Next slide. All right.